Story 1. The Thing in the Woods. I took my family to my parents' ranch deep in rural Montana, a quiet place surrounded by trees, trails, and nothing else for miles. My kids love it out there. My wife keeps saying we should move in permanently. Normally, I'd consider it. But not this time. Not with her parents tagging along. I love my wife. I really do. But her mother is unbearable. She could ruin a perfectly good day with a single sentence, and she did just that within hours of arriving. I spent most of the evening biting my tongue, swallowing rage, until I finally snapped, not out loud, not in words, but in silence. I couldn't sleep. My brain looped through imagined arguments and comebacks I'd never say out loud. At around 4:00 a.m., I gave up. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my gear, and decided to go hunting not for game, but for peace and silence. I always keep my equipment at the ranch. Boots, backpack, ammo, coffee, even a small camp stove. I left a note for my wife, took my dad's old bolt-action rifle from the closet, and disappeared into the woods before anyone else woke up. The trail was familiar. I knew every tree, every bend. I hiked about 20 minutes and reached an old hunting blind, a wooden shack built on stilts with a narrow view of the forest floor. I climbed up, settled in, and finally exhaled. That high-up silence? Therapeutic. But the calm didn't last. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to a sound I couldn't place. A deep, guttural noise. Half laugh, half retch. Like a wild animal choking or someone trying to mimic human laughter badly. It was close. I stood up, careful not to make noise, and looked through the narrow opening. There was just enough light to make out shapes. Trees. Movement. I raised my rifle and peeked through the scope. That's when I saw it, something darting behind a tree, too fast to get a clean look. But what I did see looked like a person. I froze, waited, listened. Nothing. I stayed still for nearly 30 minutes until daylight broke fully. The shape never came back. I shook my head, blaming sleep deprivation, and reached for the trail mix in my bag. Probably just a sick animal, I told myself. Maybe a coyote with mange. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that pale, human-like blur. To calm my nerves, I set up the small stove inside the blind, figuring a hot cup of coffee wouldn't hurt. I knew it wasn't ideal. Food, smell could scare off animals, and cooking in a blind isn't exactly safe, but honestly, I didn't care. I wasn't hunting anymore. I was hiding. I sat in the blind, huddled near the little flame of the stove. The scent of gas and trail mix filled the cramped space. I was warming water for coffee, just trying to stay calm or at least distracted. Then I heard it again. Movement. Close. Too close. I grabbed the rifle, stepped quietly to the wall, and peeked out through the narrow slit. Trees. Nothing more. I turned slowly to check the other side. Snap. Crunch. This time, the sound came from right outside the door of the blind. My chest tightened. I inched closer, looked through the tiny window in the door, and saw a face. About 30 feet away, half concealed behind a tree, a man was watching me. His skin was gray, almost blue, like meat left in the freezer too long. His head was bald on top, but long, stringy gray hair hung behind his ears. And his smile. God, that smile. He had no teeth, just red, swollen gums stretched wide in an expression that didn't look human. His eyes were sunken, but wide open, unblinking, gleaming in the morning light. I fell backward. Hot water splashed all over the blind's floor. My trail mix spilled, scattering in every direction. I scrambled to shut off the stove before it lit the whole place on fire. In those seconds, just seconds, he had moved. The man was right at the door now. It creaked open slowly, and he stood there, towering over me in nothing but filthy, torn underwear. He looked like a corpse that had been wandering for weeks. Thin, trembling legs, exposed ribs. A foul smell hit me like rotting meat and sweat. I aimed the rifle at him, expecting him to lunge, but he didn't. Instead, he dropped to his knees like a dog and began eating. He was scooping up spilled trail mix off the floor with his bare hands and mouth, shoveling it into himself. Not chewing, just swallowing everything whole. I pressed myself into the corner, rifle still in hand, watching this thing devour every nut, seed, and raisin like it was his last meal on Earth. He made those same sounds I'd heard earlier, that horrible, wet heaving, only now I realized he wasn't choking. He was enjoying it, relishing it. And when the last piece was gone, he slowly turned his head toward me. Those empty gums parted again, the grunting returned, and he crawled forward. The man crawled toward me like some starved beast. His mouth hung open, letting out wet, gurgling sounds, the same grotesque noise I'd heard before dawn. His eyes never blinked, never looked away, just fixed on mine, as if staring straight into my soul. I tightened my grip on the rifle, but my hands were shaking. My brain screamed, "Pull the trigger!" But something, fear, shock, confusion, froze me in place. He moved like he had no bones, like some insect, dragging his body with elbows and knees, inch by inch, closer to where I was trapped in the corner. That's when I remembered the chili. It was my dad's homemade recipe, sealed in a container. I'd packed it on impulse, and now it might be the only thing keeping me alive. I snatched the container off the floor, yanked the lid off, and shoved it toward him. The man stopped. He sniffed the air, then crawled right over. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He licked the surface of the chili like a dog marking its territory. Then, with both hands, he tilted the container and slurped the contents down his throat in one long, choking gulp. No spoon, no chewing. Just gulping and sucking until it was completely empty. He licked it clean, literally. His tongue smeared the plastic walls until it shined. And then, he looked up. Eyes locked on me again. Mouth still open. He wanted more. But that was it. That was all the food I had. My heart nearly gave out as I realized. I'm next. The second he figured out there was nothing else to eat, he'd turn on me. That horrible grin twisted wider, and he started crawling again, closer than ever now. Close enough to smell the bile on his breath. This was it. But I still had one chance. 1 second. One distraction. While he was licking the inside of the container one last time, I threw myself forward, snatched the rifle, and bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't care what he did to the blind, or if he came chasing after me. I just ran full speed back through the woods, tripping over roots and branches, heart hammering like a war drum. By the time I made it to the edge of my parents' property, my legs were numb and my lungs were on fire. But I was alive. I stumbled through the front door of the ranch house, soaking with sweat and barely able to breathe. My wife and kids were already up, sitting at the kitchen table with her parents. I must have looked like hell. Mud-smeared, pale, rifle still clutched in both hands. "What happened?" my wife asked, standing up, her face full of worry. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out right. I managed to croak, "There's someone out there." They all stared. I told them everything. The noises, the face behind the tree, the food, the way he crawled, how he looked at me like I was next. Her parents laughed. Even my wife looked unsure. "A drifter, maybe," her father said. "Just some homeless guy wandering through." But I knew better. That wasn't just a man. That thing in the woods, it was starving, yes, but not just for food. I called the sheriff. Told him I'd been attacked by a deranged man near the old hunting blind. He didn't laugh, to his credit. Said he'd send deputies to sweep the area. They searched. They found nothing. No tracks. No trash. No footprints. Not a single sign anyone had been there. And yet, I knew that if I'd stayed another minute, I wouldn't have made it back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the floorboards made my heart jump. Every gust of wind outside made me reach for the rifle. Weeks passed, but the image of that toothless, grinning face never left me. Eventually, my wife brought up the idea of moving into the ranch house again. I said no, not ever. Because if I hadn't brought that food, if I hadn't distracted him, would I have been next on the menu? Does he still live in those woods, waiting for the next lost soul to stumble into his blind? I don't ever want to find out. Story 2. The Circle in the Trees. It was late October when I finally cleared my schedule for a weekend getaway. Hunting had always been my way to reset. No phone, no noise, no people. Just the woods, the wind, and my rifle. I found a rental listing online. A single-room cabin deep in the forests of Oregon. It looked remote, exactly what I wanted. I arrived at sunrise. The trail in was a narrow, washed-out dirt road barely wide enough for my truck. The cabin stood alone in a patch of tall, swaying trees. It looked older than in the photos, with moss growing up the sides and a porch that creaked when I stepped on it. The air was crisp. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, no wind through the leaves. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt unnatural, heavy. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just tired from the drive. Inside, the place was small. A bed, a fireplace, a kitchenette, and barely working electricity. It smelled of old smoke and damp wood. But it would do. I unpacked, loaded my rifle, and headed north into the trees. The plan was simple. Hike, scout, and relax. But hours passed and I saw nothing. No tracks. No droppings. No birdsong. Not even insects buzzing. It was as if the forest had emptied itself out. The silence began to press on my nerves. Still, I pushed forward. Just before sunset, I heard something. Voices. Low, strange, rhythmic chanting. I slowed down and crept toward the sound, weaving between the trees. I stopped behind a fallen log and peeked over. They were there. 6 or 7 figures, cloaked in black robes, standing in a circle around a fire. I couldn't see their faces beneath the hoods, but their bodies swayed in unison as they spoke in some guttural, foreign language. I couldn't understand a single word, but the tone was wrong. It didn't sound like any normal ritual. It sounded hungry. I froze. My heart slammed in my chest. I didn't know what this was, but I knew I didn't belong there. I began to back away slowly, trying not to step on any dry leaves. Then I turned and ran, straight back to the cabin. I didn't stop running until the cabin came into view through the trees. My boots pounded against the dirt as I leapt up onto the porch, yanked the key from my pocket, and the door was open. Not unlocked. Open. Just slightly ajar, like someone had crept in behind me and forgot to close it all the way. I swear, I had shut and locked it before I left. My breath caught in my throat. The fading sun painted the doorway in gold and shadow. Gun ready, I stepped inside. It looked like a storm had hit. My bag was overturned, gear scattered across the floor. My sleeping bag had been ripped apart, torn straight down the middle. The lantern was on its side, still flickering. I checked every corner, every cabinet, every inch of the cabin with my rifle raised. Nothing. No one inside. But someone had been. And they'd left without taking anything, which made it worse. I locked every door, every window, nailed shut the back one for good measure. I was ready to get the hell out, but when I stepped outside again, the sky broke open. The rain came pouring down, hard and fast like a waterfall. Thunder cracked. The dirt road I'd used to get in was already turning to sludge. I was trapped. Back inside, I lit a fire and warmed a can of food, but I couldn't eat. Every gust of wind made the walls creak. Every sound outside made my stomach twist. That chanting, I could still hear it in my mind. The rhythm, the voices, the heat of the fire lighting their robes. I stayed fully dressed, boots on, gun across my chest. I didn't plan on sleeping, but somehow I did. I woke up hours later, not to silence, but to voices. Faint, chanting, outside. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my rifle and crawled toward the window. They were back. The same robed figures standing in a loose circle around my cabin, facing inward, heads tilted toward me. I could hear them through the walls speaking in that same sickening, inhuman language. I slammed the window open and screamed, "Get the hell out of here!" Nothing. They didn't flinch. Didn't stop chanting. "Leave or I'll shoot." I raised the gun. No reaction. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher calmly said help would be on the way. I told her to hurry. 20 minutes. I waited, rifle aimed, watching them through the rain. And then 5 minutes before the cops arrived, they vanished. Just turned and walked into the trees, without a sound. The deputies arrived in 2 cars, sirens off, but lights flashing. They pulled up fast, clearly expecting something. I ran out into the rain to meet them. "There were people here," I said. "They surrounded the cabin. I saw them." They didn't laugh. Not outright, but the look they exchanged said enough. "We'll take a look," one of them said. They swept the woods with flashlights, checked the perimeter. Nothing. No footprints in the mud. No signs of a fire. No crushed grass where people should have been standing. The rain had erased everything. Or maybe there had been nothing to erase. "Probably just some local kids playing a prank," one deputy offered. "A lot of weirdos like to mess with tourists," the other added. I nodded like I believed them, but I didn't. I knew what I saw. I remembered every detail. The hoods, the chanting, the way they stood like statues, unmoving, watching me from the trees. The cops followed me back to town just to be safe. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go home, either. I stayed in a motel with a deadbolt and 2 chairs pushed against the door. I never went back to that cabin. Never tried to find the listing again. Sometimes, though, late at night, I think about them. What were they doing in that forest? Who or what were they calling to? And the worst question of all, did it answer? Because sometimes, when I'm alone, when it's quiet, I still hear that chant, low and wet and guttural like it's crawling through the trees outside my window. And I know they're still out there, watching. Story 3. She watches the woods. When I was a kid, my dad took me hunting for the first time. We lived in a remote part of Montana forests, thick with ancient trees and hills that rolled like waves. That morning, we took the ATVs deep into the woods. Eventually, the trail split, and my dad stopped. "We'll cover more ground if we split up," he said. "There's a blind marked with red ribbon about a mile that way. Just stay put until 4:0. I'll meet you there." I was nervous but also proud. This was my first solo hunt. I followed the trail through towering trees. The forest here was older, thicker, darker. No wind, no bugs, just the constant calls of birds loud, echoing through the canopy. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt alive. Watching. By the time I reached the blind, the sun had fully risen. I pulled down the red ribbon, worried it might scare the deer, and climbed into the wooden hide. Inside was cold, damp, and quiet. I sat down, rifle across my knees, and waited. Hours passed. Nothing. No deer, no coyote, just squirrels, birds, and my own growing boredom. By the last hour, I was tired, frustrated, and freezing. That's when I heard something big. Branches snapped. Leaves rustled. Something heavy moved through the trees. I raised my rifle and scanned the woods. And then, it stepped into view. A massive stag, bigger than any I'd ever seen. Antlers, like twisted roots, eyes dark and alert. I held my breath and lined up the shot. My hands shook. I couldn't stop trembling. I decided to wait. Let it come closer. But then movement to the side. Another deer, a doe, stepped into the clearing. She and the stag began walking toward each other, toward me. They were so close. I could get both with 2 quick shots. I lifted the rifle, aimed, and that's when I saw it. Her. She stood right between the deer. At first, I thought my scope was fogged. She looked like a smudge, something the light couldn't hold. But as I focused, her shape became clearer. A tall, thin woman dressed in black. Her skin was pale, almost blue in the dying sunlight, but her face wasn't there. Just smooth, blank skin like melted wax. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, yet I knew she was looking at me. I felt it, a cold pressure on my chest, like she'd reached across the forest and placed an invisible hand there. I wanted to scream. Instead, I pulled the trigger aimed at the stag, desperate to break the moment. Click. The rifle jammed. I looked down in a panic, hands scrambling at the bolt. When I looked back up, the deer were gone. But she was still there, and now she was closer. No footsteps, no movement, just closer. I dropped the rifle and backed out of the blind, stumbling down the ladder, nearly twisting my ankle. The wind had picked up. The birds were screaming. The trees groaned like they were in pain. I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop. Branches whipped across my face, tore at my clothes. I could feel her behind me, not chasing, just following. Watching. Closing in. When I burst through the tree line near the trail fork, my dad was there. He looked at me, stunned. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "What happened?" I couldn't speak. Couldn't explain. How do you tell your father there's a woman in the woods with no face, who watches deer like they're puppets? He thought I panicked. Made me go back to retrieve the rifle. We searched. We never found the blind. He blamed me. Sighed I got lost. That I'd made it up? But I know where I was. And I know what I saw. My dad kept hunting that season. Almost every weekend he went back out trying to find the blind I'd lost. Trying to find the rifle. But mostly, trying to prove I'd been wrong. He never found it. Not once. And I never went back. The nightmares didn't stop. I kept dreaming of her standing in the clearing between two deer, tilting her blank face up toward the blind. Sometimes in the dreams, the rifle fires, but the bullet passes through the deer, through her. Sometimes she turns to me, and I see something begin to form where her face should be. A smile, or the hint of eyes, pressed out from under skin that won't let them show. Each time I wake up soaked in sweat, heart hammering like it did that day in the woods. Years passed. My dad and I stopped talking about it. But one day, not long ago, he mentioned it again. Said he'd gone back to the fork, said he tried one last time, took the left path instead of the right. He said he walked for miles. No blind, no ribbon. But he did find something. Felt like the woods were watching me, he muttered. Like someone was hiding behind the trees, just waiting. He forced a laugh. I don't believe in your ghost stories, but maybe you were right not to go back. I just stared at him. Because the woman without a face, she never left that forest. She didn't care about my dad. She had already picked me. And the worst part? Sometimes I still hear the forest calling me back. A whisper in my dreams. A breath on my neck. One day, I know I'll follow it. And when I get there, she'll be waiting.